coffee machine gurgled like a dying animal at 3 in the morning, which seemed fitting since that's exactly how I felt. Gray Merrickson, 52 years old, sitting in my own kitchen like a stranger in my own life, watching steam rise from a cup that would taste like burnt disappointment no matter how much I tinkered with the ancient espresso maker. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. At least you're honest about being broken, I muttered to the machine, running my fingers through what was left of my hair. The house felt too big, too quiet, too much like a museum dedicated to a marriage that had been running on autopilot for the past 3 years. Shiloh was upstairs, probably scrolling through Instagram or planning another networking event that would require a new outfit and cost us another $500 we didn't really have to spare. She'd been doing a lot of networking lately, always improving herself, always finding new mentors, always scheduling appointments that ran late into the evening. My laptop sat open on the kitchen island, glowing with the familiar blue light of code and system diagnostics. Being a security consultant for financial firms meant I never really stopped working, never really stopped thinking about vulnerabilities and how people exploit them. It's funny how that mindset creeps into everything else in your life. The notification popped up just as I was about to close the laptop and surrender to another sleepless night. A shared file in our family cloud storage. Shiloh's schedule, updated. She must have accidentally shared it to my account instead of keeping it private. Technology betrays everyone eventually, even the people who think they're too smart to make mistakes. I clicked on it without thinking much about it. Probably just her work calendar, client meetings, the usual corporate dance that kept her out of the house 12 hours a day. What I found instead made me set down my coffee cup very carefully, like a man who just discovered a bomb in his kitchen. Tuesday, 7 p.m. Private session with Rain. Business hotel downtown, room 412. Thursday, 7 p.m. Coaching with Lane, same location, room 318. Sunday, 2 p.m. Group mentorship, both present, room 412. The notes were detailed, too detailed. Rain, bring the massage oil he likes. Lane, remember he prefers the blinds closed. Sunday session, they work better as a team, bring extra towels. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, listening to the coffee machine finally wheeze into silence. 24 years of marriage, and this is how I find out. Not through some dramatic confrontation or suspicious behavior I'd been too stupid to notice. Just a cloud storage mistake, like discovering your wife is cheating through a software glitch. The funny thing was, I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was just tired. Tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Tired of pretending everything was fine when we'd barely spoken to each other in months, except to coordinate schedules and discuss whose turn it was to take out the garbage. I scrolled through more entries. 3 months of appointments. Detailed notes about preferences, locations, payment schedules. Because of course there were payment schedules. Shiloh was paying these guys for their mentorship services. Our joint account had been funding my wife's affair with not one but 2 different men who were apparently running some kind of tag team operation on her emotional and physical needs. Rain Morin, life coach and business mentor. I looked him up online. 41 years old, drove a Tesla, ran seminars about unlocking your potential and breaking through limiting beliefs. His website was full of stock photos and testimonials that sounded like they'd been written by the same person. His LinkedIn profile claimed he'd helped hundreds of professionals achieve breakthrough success, but his employment history was suspiciously vague. Lane Harlix, personal development specialist. 38 gym rat physique in every photo, offered intensive one-on-one coaching for ambitious professionals. His website was even more polished than Rain's, but just as empty of actual credentials. The kind of guy who'd convinced himself that having abs qualified him to give life advice. I spent the next hour reading through everything, taking screenshots, organizing the information with the same methodical approach I used for penetration testing at work. Vulnerabilities identified, attack vectors mapped, potential exploits documented. By the time the sun started creeping through the kitchen windows, I'd made my decision. Not the decision Shiloh probably expected me to make. Not the dramatic confrontation, the shouting match, the demand for explanations and apologies. Something much simpler and infinitely more devastating. I was going to disappear. Not physically, not like some middle-aged man having a breakdown and running off to find himself. I was going to disappear financially, legally, systematically. I was going to extract myself from our shared life with the same precision I used to extract data from compromised systems. First, the money. I'd been handling our finances for years because Shiloh didn't have time for that boring stuff. Every joint account, every shared credit card, every automatic payment and subscription service. I had access to all of it, and more importantly, I had the documentation showing that most of the assets had come from my income anyway. I started with a checking account, transferring my portion to a new account I'd opened 6 months ago when I'd started suspecting something was wrong. Then the savings, the investment accounts, the emergency fund that Shiloh didn't even know existed. I left her exactly what she'd contributed, plus half of what we'd accumulated together during the marriage. Legally fair, mathematically precise, and financially devastating for someone who'd gotten used to living on 2 incomes while only earning 1. The credit cards were next. I called each company, explained that I needed to remove myself from the joint accounts due to an upcoming divorce, and requested new cards be issued only in my name. The old cards would be canceled within 24 hours. Utilities, insurance, subscriptions, automatic payments, everything that kept our comfortable middle-class life running smoothly. I transferred what I wanted to keep to my new accounts and canceled the rest. The house would still have electricity and water, but the premium cable package, the streaming services, the gym membership, the monthly wine club, all of it would disappear along with the automatic payments. By the time I heard Shiloh moving around upstairs, I'd systematically dismantled our financial partnership with the thoroughness of a man who'd spent 20 years learning how to find and exploit weaknesses in complex systems. I packed my clothes while she was in the shower, loading everything into the truck I'd bought with cash 3 months ago when I'd started preparing for this possibility. Not because I'd known about Rain and Lane specifically, but because I'd known something was wrong and I'd learned a long time ago that preparation beats reaction every single time. The note I left on the kitchen counter was brief. Found your schedule. Interesting appointments. I've transferred my portion of our assets to separate accounts and removed myself from all joint obligations. You'll receive divorce papers within the week. The house is yours until we settle things legally. I hope your mentors can help you figure out how to pay for it. I left the house so clean that even the ghosts would be confused about what had happened. My new apartment was a furnished 1-bedroom in a complex across town, the kind of place that catered to divorced men and recent college graduates who couldn't afford anything better. It had beige walls, beige carpet, and a beige couch that had probably witnessed more midlife crises than a therapist's office. But it was mine, paid for with cash, no lease longer than 6 months, no ties to anyone or anything I was trying to leave behind. I'd been there exactly 4 hours when my phone started ringing. The first call came at 11 a.m., right around the time Shiloh would have discovered that her morning routine of checking our joint account balance had suddenly become much more depressing. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 6 calls that followed in rapid succession. The messages were predictably dramatic. Confusion, then anger, then panic as she started realizing the scope of what I'd done. "Gray, what the hell is going on? Call me back right now." Then, 20 minutes later, "The bank says you moved money out of our accounts. That's illegal, Gray. You can't just steal our money." And finally, an hour after that, "Please just call me back. We can work this out. Whatever you think is happening, we can fix this." I was monitoring our smart home system from my laptop, watching the real-time data that showed exactly how she was handling the news. The thermostat had been adjusted to 89 degrees. She always cranked up the heat when she was stressed. The security system showed she'd left the house 3 times in 2 hours, probably driving around trying to figure out what to do next. The refrigerator's internet connection told me she'd opened it 14 times since noon without taking anything out. Classic anxiety behavior. The smart TV showed she'd turned on Netflix, then Hulu, then Amazon Prime, never watching anything for more than 5 minutes. She was spiraling, and I was watching it happen in real time through the same technology she'd used to accidentally expose her affair. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Gray, I know you're getting these. Please just talk to me. I can explain everything." I almost laughed. Explain what? That she'd been paying 2 different men to service her needs while I worked 60-hour weeks to fund her lifestyle? That our marriage had been so empty she'd had to hire professionals to make her feel desired? That I'd been living with a stranger who'd gotten so good at lying that she'd forgotten we were supposed to be partners? Instead of responding, I drove to the Blue Heron, a bar on the east side of town that catered to tech workers and other people who understood that sometimes you needed to drink somewhere that didn't have craft cocktails or exposed brick walls. It was the kind of place where you could sit in a corner booth and nobody would bother you, where the bartender understood that not every customer wanted to share their life story. Cleo was working the afternoon shift, wiping down glasses with the efficient movements of someone who'd been doing this job for 15 years and had seen every possible variation of human stupidity. She'd been a cybersecurity specialist before burning out on corporate life and deciding that serving drinks was more honest work than protecting companies from their own incompetence. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said when she saw me settling into my usual booth. Haven't seen you in here for months. Let me guess. Shiloh's got you on another self-improvement kick where alcohol interferes with your chakras or some such bullshit. Something like that, I said. Whiskey, neat. And keep them coming. Cleo raised an eyebrow but poured the drink without comment. She'd known me long enough to recognize when I wasn't in the mood for conversation, but not long enough to just leave me alone entirely. You look like a man who's had an interesting morning, she said, sliding the glass across the table. You could say that. Found out my wife's been scheduling regular appointments with a couple of life coaches who specialize in very hands-on mentoring techniques. Cleo's expression didn't change, but she stopped wiping the glass she was holding. Rain Morin and Lane Harlex? I looked up sharply. You know them? Honey, everybody knows them. They've been running their little tag team operation on Lonely Housewives for 2 years now. They come in here sometimes, usually celebrating another successful mentorship program. Real pieces of work, both of them. She sat down across from me, which meant this conversation was about to get interesting. Cleo didn't sit down unless she had information worth sharing. Rain's the smooth talker, she continued. Drives that ridiculous Tesla, always talking about his latest business venture, always one deal away from making it big. Lane's the muscle, spends half his time at the gym, and the other half convincing women that he's got some kind of special insight into their potential. And they work together. Like a well-oiled machine. Rain handles the emotional seduction, makes them feel special and understood. Lane provides the physical validation, makes them feel desirable and powerful. They've got it down to a science. Find a woman who's feeling neglected or underappreciated, offer her exactly what she thinks she's missing, then charge premium rates for the privilege. I finished my whiskey and gestured for another. How many women are we talking about? In the past 2 years? Maybe a dozen that I know of. They're careful about it. Never target anyone who might cause them legal problems. Middle-aged married women with disposable income and husbands who don't pay attention. They call it life coaching and personal development, but everybody knows what it really is. The second whiskey burned less than the first, which probably meant I should slow down, but I wasn't in the mood to make good decisions. What happens when the women figure out what's really going on? Most of them don't want to admit they got played, so they just quietly stop the sessions and pretend it never happened. The ones who get angry usually don't have any legal recourse because technically the guys are providing the services they advertised. Emotional support, physical fitness coaching, business mentoring, it's all technically legitimate. And the husbands? Cleo's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Most of them never find out. The ones who do usually handle it quietly. Divorce, asset division, everybody moves on with their lives. You're the first one I've heard of who just disappeared overnight. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout our conversation, but I'd been ignoring it. Now I pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from Shiloh, 4 from numbers I didn't recognize, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Gray, the credit cards aren't working. What did you do? I can't access our savings account. This is insane. Rain says you're probably having some kind of breakdown. He wants to help. Lane thinks we should all sit down and talk this through like adults. That last message made me laugh out loud, which caused Cleo to lean forward with interest. They want to help, I said, showing her the phone. Apparently, I'm having a breakdown, and they want to counsel me through it. Oh, this is rich. They're actually going to try to gaslight you into accepting the situation. These guys have balls, I'll give them that. My phone rang again. This time it was one of the unknown numbers, so I answered it. Gray? The voice was smooth, confident, with just a hint of concern. This is Rain Morin. I think we need to talk. Do we? Look, I understand you're upset. Shiloh explained the situation, and I want you to know that what we've been doing is completely above board. She's been working with Lane and me on some personal development goals, and I think there might be some misunderstanding about the nature of our professional relationship. I looked at Cleo, who was listening with obvious amusement. Professional relationship? Is that what we're calling it? Gray, I've been working with people in crisis for over 10 years, and what you're experiencing right now is a completely normal response to feeling like you've lost control of your life situation. The financial moves you made today, the sudden departure from your home, these are classic symptoms of a man who's struggling with feelings of inadequacy and abandonment. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. He was actually trying to therapize me into accepting that my wife was paying him and his partner for services that definitely weren't covered by our health insurance. Here's what I think, Rain, I said. I think you and Lane have been running a very lucrative side business, and now you're worried that your cash cow is about to dry up because she can't afford your fees without access to my income. There was a pause. When Rain spoke again, his voice had lost some of its professional warmth. I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Shiloh is a grown woman who's capable of making her own decisions about her personal development. If you're not able to support her growth as a person, then maybe you need to examine what that says about you as a husband. You know what, Rain? You're absolutely right. I haven't been supportive enough of Shiloh's growth, but I'm planning to fix that real soon. I hung up and turned off the phone. Cleo was grinning like a woman who'd just witnessed something spectacular. "Oh, honey," she said, "you're not just going to divorce her, are you? You're going to destroy them." The thought had occurred to me. "What do you need?" I looked at her carefully. Cleo had always been straight with me, but what I was thinking about doing would require help from someone who understood that sometimes the legal system wasn't enough to deliver the kind of justice that actually mattered. "Information," I said. "Everything you can tell me about how they operate, where they're vulnerable, what kind of mistakes they've made with other clients, and maybe some technical assistance from someone who knows how to make technology work in creative ways." Cleo's grin got wider. "Honey, you just made my week interesting." Funny thing about non-refundable reservations. Sometimes the guest gets left holding the bill. The next morning brought a voicemail from Shiloh that sounded like she'd been crying, which might have bothered me if I hadn't spent the previous evening learning exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Cleo had made some calls, reached out to her network of former tech workers who'd landed in various service industry jobs around the city, and the picture that emerged was even uglier than I'd imagined. Rain and Lane weren't just running a two-man operation. They had a whole system worked out, complete with referrals from other professionals in the life coaching industry, a network of hotels that looked the other way, and a client base that included at least 15 women I could identify just from the information Cleo had gathered in one evening. But what really got my attention was the financial angle. These guys weren't just charging for individual sessions, they were selling comprehensive transformation packages that ran anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on how much they thought their clients could afford. And they were smart about it, structuring the payments to look like legitimate business expenses that could potentially be written off as professional development. Shiloh had purchased the Premium Partnership Package, 12 months of combined coaching from both men, with individual and group sessions, for the bargain price of $18,000. Money that had come directly out of our joint savings account in monthly installments that I'd never noticed because they were listed as payments to Pinnacle Professional Development LLC. I was sitting in my truck outside Shiloh's office building, watching her through the glass walls of the marketing firm where she worked as a senior account executive, when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered it anyway. "Gray, this is Lane Harlex. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday." His voice was different from Rain's, less smooth, more direct, with an undertone that suggested he was used to getting his way through physical presence rather than verbal manipulation. "Did we? I wasn't aware we'd gotten on any kind of foot at all. Look, man, I get it. You found out your wife has been working with other people to improve herself, and your ego took a hit. That's natural. But what you're doing right now, cutting off her access to money, abandoning your responsibilities as a husband, that's not going to solve anything." Through the office windows, I could see Shiloh at her desk, talking animatedly on her phone. Probably talking to Lane, actually, based on the timing. I watched her gestures, the way she kept running her fingers through her hair, the way she kept glancing toward the parking lot as if she expected to see my truck. "Here's what I think, Lane," I said. "I think you and Rain have been running a very successful con game, and now you're worried that your business model is about to take a hit. Because if word gets out about what you're really doing, it's going to be a lot harder to convince other lonely housewives that you're legitimate professionals." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Pinnacle Professional Development LLC, registered in Delaware, no actual business address, no employees besides you and Rain, no legitimate credentials or certifications. You're running a high-end escort service and calling it life coaching." The silence on the other end of the line told me I'd hit the mark. When Lane spoke again, his voice had gotten harder. "You need to be very careful about the accusations you make, Gray. Slander is a serious legal matter, and Rain and I have worked very hard to build our professional reputations. If you start spreading lies about our business, we'll have no choice but to protect ourselves." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. You're a middle-aged tech worker going through a midlife crisis. We're established business professionals with clients who can vouch for the value of our services. If this turns into a legal battle, who do you think people are going to believe?" I almost laughed. These guys were so used to dealing with emotionally vulnerable women and oblivious husbands that they'd completely misjudged what they were dealing with. They thought I was just another cuckolded middle-aged man who'd either slink away quietly or make a lot of noise that wouldn't amount to anything. "You know what, Lane? You're absolutely right. This could turn into a legal battle, and people would have to choose who to believe. So let's make sure they have all the information they need to make an informed decision. I hung up and immediately called Nia, Shiloh's assistant, on her direct line. Gray? Oh my God, is everything okay? Shiloh's been freaking out all morning, and she won't tell anyone what's going on. Nia was 26, sharp as a knife, and had never particularly liked the way Shiloh treated her. More importantly, she was ambitious and smart enough to recognize an opportunity when she saw one. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about Shiloh's expenses lately? Business trips, professional development courses, anything that seemed excessive or questionable? There was a pause. Are you asking me to spy on my boss? I'm asking you to help me understand how $18,000 of our money got spent on services that I never knew about. Another pause, longer this time. Can you meet me for lunch? Away from the office? An hour later, I was sitting across from Nia in a sandwich shop 6 blocks from her office, watching her flip through a folder that she'd apparently been keeping for months. I started documenting things because some of the expenses didn't make sense, she said. Shiloh would submit receipts for business development seminars and coaching sessions, but when I tried to schedule follow-up meetings or coordinate with other departments about implementing what she'd learned, she'd always make excuses. The folder was a goldmine: receipts, expense reports, copies of checks, email correspondence with the accounting department. Nia had been doing her job so thoroughly that she'd accidentally created a paper trail that documented exactly how Shiloh had been funneling company money into her personal development fund. This is company money? I asked. Some of it. She's been categorizing the coaching sessions as professional development, which means the company's been reimbursing her for about 60% of the costs. The rest she's been paying out of pocket, but she's been using the company credit card and then submitting personal reimbursements, which meant that Shiloh hadn't just been cheating on me, she'd been committing expense fraud against her employer, and Nia had documentation going back 8 months. Why are you showing me this? Nia's smile was sharp. Because Shiloh's been taking credit for my work, passing me over for promotions, and treating me like her personal assistant instead of the marketing coordinator I was hired to be. And because Gina Reeves has been asking questions about Shiloh's expense reports, and I think she's planning to make a move. Gina Reeves was Shiloh's main rival at the company, a woman who'd been passed over for the senior account executive position when Shiloh was hired 3 years ago. If she was sniffing around Shiloh's finances, it meant she was looking for ammunition. What kind of move? The kind that ends with Shiloh getting fired and Gina getting promoted to take her place. Gina's been building a case about financial irregularities in Shiloh's department, and if she can prove that Shiloh's been misusing company funds... I looked at the folder again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just evidence of my wife's affair, it was evidence of a pattern of fraud that could result in criminal charges. Nia, I need you to do something for me, and it's going to require you to be very careful about how you handle it. What? I need you to make sure this information gets to the right people at the right time, but not yet. I need a few more days to handle some other business first. She nodded slowly. How much trouble is Shiloh in? The kind that doesn't go away quietly. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Rain. We need to meet. Tonight, 8 p.m., Blue Heron. Come alone. I showed the message to Nia, who raised an eyebrow. Are you going? Wouldn't miss it. Be careful, Gray. These guys have been getting away with this for a long time. They're not going to give up without a fight. That evening, I walked into the Blue Heron to find Rain and Lane sitting in a corner booth, looking like a couple of predators who'd been backed into a corner. Rain was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, while Lane was dressed in the kind of casual athletic wear that was designed to show off the physique he'd spent so much time developing. The bar was busier than usual for a Wednesday night, which meant we had an audience for whatever was about to happen. Cleo was working behind the bar, and I caught her eye as I walked in. She nodded slightly, which told me she was ready for whatever might go down. Gray, Rain said as I approached their table. Thanks for coming. I think we can work this situation out in a way that benefits everyone involved. Do you? Lane leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. Here's the thing, Gray. Shiloh is a grown woman who made her own choices about what she needed in her life. If you couldn't provide what she was looking for, that's on you, not on us. I sat down across from them, noting that they'd positioned themselves so that Lane was blocking the most direct route to the exit. Classic intimidation positioning designed to make me feel trapped and vulnerable. You're right, I said. Shiloh did make her own choices, and now I'm making mine. Rain's smile was practiced, professional. Look, we understand that this is a difficult situation for you. Finding out that your wife has been seeking fulfillment outside your marriage is never easy, but what we've been providing is a legitimate service: emotional support, life coaching, business mentoring. If there's been some physical component to our relationship, that's between consenting adults. $18,000 worth of consenting adults. Shiloh felt that our services were worth the investment. The transformation she's undergone over the past year has been remarkable. She's more confident, more assertive, more in touch with her own needs and desires. Isn't that what you want for your wife? Lane's laugh was ugly. Besides, what are you going to do about it? You're a middle-aged computer nerd whose wife had to hire other men to make her feel like a woman. You think anyone's going to take your side in this? The comment was designed to provoke me, to make me lose my temper and do something stupid that would give them the upper hand. Instead, I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us. Actually, I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in this situation, starting with Shiloh's employer, who's been unknowingly funding her affair through fraudulent expense reports. Rain's professional mask slipped for just a moment. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Pinnacle Professional Development LLC has been billing Shiloh's company for services that definitely don't qualify as legitimate business expenses. I'm talking about the fact that you guys have been running this scam on at least a dozen other women, and some of them have been using company money to pay for it too. Lane's face had gone red. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? I opened my phone and showed them a photo of Nia's folder. Receipts, expense reports, email correspondence, bank records. Everything documented, everything traceable, everything admissible in both civil and criminal court. The silence at the table was deafening. Around us, the normal bar noise continued. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. But our little corner had gone quiet. Rain recovered first, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. Even if what you're saying is true, you're talking about a civil matter between us and our clients' employers. It has nothing to do with you personally. Doesn't it? Because I'm thinking that when this information becomes public, it's going to be very difficult for you guys to continue operating your business. Hard to convince new clients that you're legitimate professionals when everyone knows you're running a high-end prostitution ring. Lane started to stand up, his face flushed with anger, but Rain put a hand on his arm to stop him. The gesture was telling. Rain was the brains of the operation. Lane was the muscle, and they both knew that physical intimidation wasn't going to work in a crowded bar. What do you want? Rain asked. I smiled, feeling a cold satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in years. I want you to understand that you picked the wrong mark this time. Shiloh might have been an easy target, but I'm not. And I'm going to make sure that everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of business you're really running. I stood up, leaving my phone on the table for a moment longer so they could see the photo of the evidence folder, then picked it up and walked toward the bar. Behind me, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers, but I didn't look back. Cleo was waiting for me with a beer and a grin. How'd it go? They're scared, which means they're going to do something stupid. Good. I hate guys like that, predators who think they're too smart to get caught. My phone buzzed with a text from Shiloh. Rain told me what you said to them. You're making a huge mistake, Gray. These are good men who've been helping me become a better person. If you try to destroy them, you'll be destroying me too. I showed the message to Cleo, who snorted with laughter. Oh, honey, you're not destroying her. You're just letting her destroy herself in public. Sometimes the best security isn't a password, it's a public spectacle. The beauty of being a security consultant is that you learn to think like both the defender and the attacker. You spend your days identifying vulnerabilities, mapping out attack vectors, and developing strategies to exploit weaknesses in complex systems. After 20 years in the business, that kind of thinking becomes second nature. You start seeing the world in terms of access points and potential exploits. Rain and Lane had made their first mistake by underestimating me. Their second mistake was not realizing that their entire operation was built on a foundation of digital vulnerabilities that a halfway competent hacker could exploit in about 15 minutes. I spent Thursday morning in my apartment, surrounded by laptops and monitors, doing what I did best: reconnaissance. Rain's Tesla was connected to the internet, because of course it was. Lane's gym had a social media presence that included location tracking and real-time updates. Both men used the same business hotel for their sessions, and that hotel had a guest Wi-Fi network that was about as secure as a screen door. By noon, I had access to Rain's car, Lane's social media accounts, and the hotel's reservation system. By 2 p.m., I'd identified the credit card numbers they used for business expenses, the bank accounts where they deposited their fees, and the phone numbers they used to communicate with clients. The plan I developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy them through legal channels, which would take months and might not even work, I was going to destroy them through public humiliation. I was going to use their own technology against them, turn their carefully crafted professional images into sources of embarrassment, and make sure that everyone in their social and professional networks knew exactly what kind of business they were really running. Thursday evening, Rain had a session scheduled with one of his other clients. Not Shiloh, according to the calendar I'd hacked from his phone. He was meeting her at the business hotel, same routine he'd been following for months. Predictable, professional, and completely vulnerable to the right kind of technological interference. At 6:45 p.m., I was sitting in the hotel parking lot with a laptop and a directional antenna, watching Rain's Tesla pull into a parking space near the main entrance. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably contained whatever props he used for his business mentoring sessions. At 6:50 p.m., I activated the exploit I'd developed for his car's entertainment system. The Tesla's stereo system suddenly came to life at maximum volume, playing the audio track I'd extracted from Lane's phone, a recording of one of Shiloh's private sessions that Lane had apparently made for his own entertainment. Shiloh's voice filled the parking lot, along with some very explicit commentary about the services she was receiving and how much better they were than anything she got at home. Rain frantically tried to turn off the stereo, but I'd locked him out of the car's control system. The doors wouldn't open, the windows wouldn't roll down, and the audio kept playing. Other hotel guests started gathering in the parking lot, some of them recording the spectacle with their phones. After 5 minutes of public humiliation, I unlocked the car and watched Rain stumble out, his face red with embarrassment and rage. His client, who had been waiting in the hotel lobby, took one look at the crowd and the phones recording everything, and walked quickly back to her own car. Rain's evening was ruined, his professional image was shattered, and the video footage was already being uploaded to social media by helpful bystanders who thought they'd witnessed some kind of bizarre technical malfunction. Friday morning, it was Lane's turn. Lane spent his mornings at an upscale gym downtown, the kind of place where professionals went to maintain their physiques and network with other ambitious people. He had a routine: cardio, weights, protein shake, social media updates about his commitment to physical excellence and personal development. I'd been monitoring his social media for weeks, learning his patterns, identifying his vulnerabilities. Lane was proud of his physique, proud of his gym performance, and very proud of the inspirational content he posted every morning about pushing through barriers and achieving peak performance. At 8 a.m., I was parked outside the gym with Hank, my old friend from the motorcycle club I'd belonged to before I got married and respectable. Hank was 60 years old, built like a refrigerator, and had never met a problem he couldn't solve with the right combination of intimidation and creative property damage. "So this guy's been screwing your wife and charging you for the privilege?" Hank asked, cracking his knuckles. "That's the basic situation, yeah." "And you want me to have a friendly conversation with him about his business practices?" "Nothing violent, just educational." Hank's grin was terrifying. I can be very educational. Lane emerged from the gym at 9:30, dressed in his usual athletic wear, carrying a protein shake and his gym bag. He was walking toward his car, a lifted pickup truck with custom rims and a sound system that probably cost more than most people's cars, when Hank intercepted him. "Excuse me," Hank said, his voice polite but carrying an undertone of menace that made Lane stop walking. "Are you Lane Harlex?" "Yeah, who's asking?" "I'm asking on behalf of a friend whose wife has been taking your coaching sessions. He wanted me to deliver a message." Lane looked around the parking lot, probably calculating his chances of making it to his truck before Hank could catch him. Given that Hank was standing between him and the vehicle, and that Hank was roughly the size and shape of a small building, Lane apparently decided that conversation was the better option. "Look, man, I don't know what your friend told you, but I run a legitimate business. If he's got a problem with his wife's personal development choices, that's between them." Hank nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting, because my friend seems to think you've been providing some very personal services that go way beyond normal coaching, and he's got documentation to prove it." "Documentation?" I stepped out from behind a nearby car, holding my phone. "Audio recordings, financial records, expense reports, hotel receipts. Everything needed to prove that you and Rain have been running a prostitution ring and calling it life coaching." Lane's face went through several interesting color changes. "Gray, I should have known you'd be behind this." "Behind what?" "I'm just having a conversation with a concerned citizen about your business practices." Hank moved closer to Lane, not threatening exactly, but making it clear that running away wasn't really an option. "Here's the thing, Lane. My friend Gray is a pretty reasonable guy, but he's also got a lot of information that could make your life very difficult. Information that he could share with the police, with your clients' employers, with their husbands, with anyone who might be interested in knowing what kind of services you really provide." "What do you want?" I smiled. I want you to understand that your business model has a fatal flaw. It depends on discretion, on keeping everything quiet and professional. But what happens when that discretion disappears? What happens when everyone knows exactly what you're doing? As if on cue, several gym members emerged from the building, including a few people I recognized from the local tech community. Lane noticed them too, and his expression grew more desperate. You can't prove anything illegal, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I don't have to prove anything illegal, I replied. I just have to prove what you've been doing. And once that information is public, how long do you think it'll take before your other clients disappear? Before their husbands start asking questions? Before their employers start investigating expense reports? Hank leaned in closer. And that's assuming nobody decides to handle this situation more personally. Lane looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to figure out his options. Finally, he seemed to deflate. What do you want me to do? I want you to call Rain and tell him that your business partnership is over. I want you to refund every penny you've taken from Shiloh, and I want you to disappear from her life permanently. And if I hear that you're still operating anywhere in this city, I'm going to make sure that everyone you've ever met knows exactly what kind of services you provide. Lane pulled out his phone and made the call, while Hank and I listened. The conversation was brief and heated, but the message was clear. Pinnacle Professional Development LLC was officially out of business. After Lane drove away, Hank and I walked back to my truck. That felt good, Hank said. Guys like that think they can get away with anything because most people are too embarrassed to fight back. It's not over yet. Rain's still out there, and he's going to try to salvage the situation somehow. What's next? Next, we let Shiloh's employer know about the expense fraud, and then we sit back and watch everything fall apart. That afternoon, I called Nia and told her it was time to share her folder with Gina Reeves. By 5 p.m., Gina had requested a meeting with the company's CFO and HR director. By 6 p.m., Shiloh had been called into a conference room for what was probably the most uncomfortable conversation of her professional life. I monitored the situation through the smart home system, watching as Shiloh came home early, turned the thermostat up to 92 degrees, and spent 2 hours pacing around the house while making frantic phone calls. The calls to Rain went straight to voicemail. The calls to Lane did the same. The calls to me remained unanswered. At 8 p.m., she sent me a text message. Gray, please call me. I've been fired. I need to talk to you. I turned off my phone and poured myself a drink. Shiloh always said her career was her baby. I just arranged for a little paternity test. Friday morning brought a knock on my apartment door at 7 a.m. I opened it to find Shiloh standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like she hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and her hands were shaking. We need to talk, she said. Do we? Gray, please. I know you're angry, and I know I screwed up, but what you've done to me is insane. I lost my job. Rain and Lane won't return my calls. I can't access our money, I can't pay the mortgage, and now Gina's telling people that I'm going to be prosecuted for expense fraud. I stepped aside to let her into the apartment, noting how she looked around at the sparse furnishings and beige walls. This wasn't the life she'd expected to be having at 49. You want some coffee? I asked. I want my husband back. That's interesting, because for the past year it seems like you wanted 2 other men instead. Shiloh sat down on the beige couch and put her head in her hands. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Rain and Lane were helping me figure out what I wanted from life, helping me become more confident and assertive. The physical stuff, that just happened naturally. $18,000 worth of natural. I was going to tell you. I was working up the courage to explain that our marriage wasn't working, that we'd grown apart, that maybe we needed to consider other arrangements. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her. Other arrangements like what? An open marriage where I fund your affairs while pretending everything is fine? I thought maybe we could work something out. Rain said that a lot of couples find ways to accommodate different needs, that there are arrangements that can work if everyone's honest about what they want. Rain said a lot of things, apparently. Did he also mention that he's been running the same scam on at least a dozen other women? That his life coaching business is actually a high-end escort service? That he and Lane have been documenting their sessions with clients for their own entertainment? Shiloh looked up sharply. That's not true. I pulled out my phone and played the audio file I'd extracted from Lane's device. Her voice, unmistakably, describing in explicit detail what she wanted from her coaching sessions and how much she was willing to pay for it. The color drained from her face. Where did you get that? Lane recorded it. Probably recorded all of your sessions. Did you know that? Did you know that your private moments were being saved as trophies? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands. When she finally spoke, Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me, Gray?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You didn't just cheat on me. You stole from me, you lied to me, you committed fraud against your employer, and you got played by a couple of con artists who saw you coming from a mile away. So, what happens now? Now you figure out how to rebuild your life without my help. The divorce papers will be filed next week. You'll get half of what we accumulated during the marriage, minus what you spent on your personal development. The house will have to be sold unless you can qualify for a mortgage on your own, which seems unlikely given your current employment situation." Shiloh started crying, which might have affected me 6 months ago, but now just seemed like another manipulation attempt. "Gray, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We've been together for 24 years. That has to count for something." "It does count for something. It counts as 24 years of my life that I'm never getting back." My phone rang. The caller ID showed Gina Reeves's number. "Gray, this is Gina. I'm calling because we're having a board meeting this afternoon about Shiloh's situation, and I wanted to give you a heads up about what's going to happen." I put the call on speaker so Shiloh could hear. "The company's going to file criminal charges for the expense fraud. We've identified over $30,000 in questionable expenses over the past 18 months, and the evidence is pretty clear that she was using company funds for personal services." Shiloh's face went white. "30,000? "We also discovered that she was claiming tax deductions for business expenses that were actually payments to Pinnacle Professional Development, which means there are potential tax fraud issues as well. The IRS will probably want to take a look at her returns for the past few years." I looked at Shiloh, who was staring at the phone like it was a snake. "Gina, thanks for the call. I appreciate the heads up. There's one more thing. The board wants to know if you have any additional information about Pinnacle Professional Development or the services they were providing. Apparently there are other employees who may have been using similar services, and we want to make sure we identify all the potential liability." "I'll send you everything I have." After I hung up, Shiloh was completely silent. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She wasn't just looking at divorce and unemployment, she was looking at criminal charges and potential prison time. "Gray," she said finally, "I need help. I need a lawyer. I need someone who understands financial crimes. You need to take responsibility for your choices. But you could help me. You could tell them that you knew about the expenses, that you approved them, that this was all a misunderstanding." I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make her flinch. "You want me to commit perjury to save you from the consequences of your own actions? I want you to remember that you love me. I did love you, past tense. The woman I loved wouldn't have done what you did." Shiloh stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into anger. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me? You think you've never made mistakes? I've made plenty of mistakes. But I never stole money to fund an affair. I never lied to my spouse for over a year. And I never got so desperate for validation that I paid strangers to make me feel special. Rain and Lane weren't strangers. They were helping me discover who I really am, what I really want from life. What you really are is a middle-aged woman who got conned by a couple of predators. What you really want is someone else to pay for your mistakes." Shiloh's anger flared into rage. "You know what, Gray? I'm glad I had an affair. I'm glad I found men who actually wanted to spend time with me, who made me feel desirable and interesting and alive, because you sure as hell weren't doing any of that." "You're right. I wasn't. Because I was too busy working 60-hour weeks to pay for the lifestyle you demanded while you were off discovering yourself with your paid companions." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "This isn't over, Gray. I'm going to fight the criminal charges. I'm going to contest the divorce, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of vindictive, controlling bastard you really are. Good luck with that. I'm sure your legal team will be very impressed by your defense strategy." After she left, I sat in my apartment for a while, thinking about the conversation and what came next. Shiloh was right about one thing. This wasn't over. She was going to fight, and that meant I needed to be prepared for whatever desperate moves she might make. My phone buzzed with a text from Cleo. "Heard through the grapevine that Rain's been asking around about you. Word is he's planning something for tonight. You might want to watch your back." I texted back, "Where?" "Blue Heron. He's been telling people he's going to set the record straight about what really happened with his business. Sounds like he's planning some kind of public confrontation." I smiled. A public confrontation was exactly what I'd been hoping for. That evening, I walked into the Blue Heron to find it more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Word had apparently gotten around that there was going to be some kind of showdown, and the local tech community had turned out in force to watch the spectacle. Rain was holding court at the bar, dressed in an expensive suit, surrounded by people who were listening to his version of events. With varying degrees of skepticism, he was playing the victim, talking about how he'd been targeted by a jealous husband who couldn't handle his wife's personal growth. The truth is, he was saying as I approached, Gray Merrickson is a controlling, abusive husband who couldn't stand the fact that his wife was becoming more independent and confident. When she started working with professional coaches to improve her life, he sabotaged her career and destroyed our business out of pure spite. The crowd turned to look at me as I walked up to the bar. Cleo was working, and she slid a beer across to me with a knowing look. "That's an interesting story, Rain," I said. "Is that the same story you're going to tell the police when they start investigating Pinnacle Professional Development?" Rain's confident smile faltered slightly. "There's nothing for them to investigate. We ran a legitimate coaching business." "Did you? Because I've got documentation showing that you and Lane charged clients for private services while claiming to provide business mentoring. I've got audio recordings of your sessions, financial records showing how you structured payments to avoid taxes, and testimony from multiple clients about what kind of services you actually provided." The crowd was listening intently now, phones out, recording everything. This was exactly the kind of drama that would be all over social media within the hour. "You're lying," Rain said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and played the same audio file I'd played for Shiloh that morning. Her voice filled the bar, describing in explicit detail what she wanted from her coaching sessions and how much she was willing to pay for it. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. Gasps, nervous laughter, whispered conversations. Rain's face went red with embarrassment and anger. "That's private," he said. "You had no right to record that." "I didn't record it. Lane did. Apparently he liked to keep trophies of his sessions with clients." "Did you know that, Rain? Did you know your business partner was documenting everything you did?" Rain looked around the bar, realizing that his attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. The crowd was no longer sympathetic. They were disgusted. "This is harassment," he said. "I'm going to call the police." "Please do. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about your business model, especially when they find out that some of your clients were using company money to pay for your services." I turned to address the crowd directly. "For anyone who's interested, Rain Morin and Lane Harlex have been running a prostitution ring disguised as a life coaching business. They target married women who are feeling neglected or underappreciated, offer them emotional and physical validation, and then charge premium rates for services that definitely aren't covered by professional coaching certifications." The crowd was buzzing now, people pulling out their phones to look up Pinnacle Professional Development, sharing information, connecting dots. Rain's reputation was being destroyed in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "You always said I never fought for you," I said, looking directly at Rain. "Well, now I'm fighting, and I'm going to make sure that everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of business you were really running." Rain tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but people were blocking his way, asking questions, demanding answers. His carefully crafted professional image was crumbling, and the video footage of his meltdown was already being uploaded to social media. I finished my beer and walked out of the bar, leaving Rain to deal with the consequences of his choices. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, and I felt lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Nia. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. They want you to testify about what you know. This is going to be huge." I texted back, "I'll be there." Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. The boardroom at Shiloh's former company was all glass walls and polished surfaces, the kind of corporate environment designed to make everyone feel like they were part of something important and professional. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was sitting at a conference table surrounded by executives, lawyers, and HR representatives, all of them very interested in what I had to say about Pinnacle Professional Development and my wife's financial arrangements. Gina Reeves was leading the meeting, her satisfaction barely concealed as she laid out the scope of what they'd discovered. Over the past 18 months, we've identified $37,000 in questionable expenses submitted by Shiloh Ravlin. All of these expenses were categorized as professional development and business coaching, but the evidence suggests they were actually payments for personal services of a nature. The company's CFO, a stern-looking man in his 60s, was reviewing the folder that Nia had compiled. "Mr. Merrickson, you've provided us with extensive documentation about these services. Can you walk us through what you discovered and how you obtained this information?" I spent the next hour laying out everything I'd learned about Rain and Lane's operation. The fake business credentials, the hotel arrangements, the network of clients, the audio recordings, the financial structures they used to avoid taxes and maintain the appearance of legitimacy. The lawyers were taking notes furiously, and I could see them calculating the potential liability exposure. Not just for Shiloh's fraud, but for the company's failure to properly oversee expense reporting and the possibility that other employees had been involved in similar arrangements. Mr. Merrickson, the HR director asked, do you believe that Ms. Ravelin understood that what she was doing constituted fraud against the company? I believe she understood exactly what she was doing. The expenses were carefully categorized to make them appear legitimate, the payments were structured to stay under reporting thresholds, and she went to considerable lengths to hide the true nature of the services she was receiving. And you had no knowledge of these arrangements until you accidentally discovered her scheduling file? None whatsoever. I was completely unaware that she was having an affair, much less that she was using company funds to pay for it. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with the lawyers asking increasingly detailed questions about dates, amounts, and specific services. By the time it was over, it was clear that Shiloh was facing serious criminal charges and that the company was preparing to pursue both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. As I was leaving the building, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. Mr. Merrickson, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you have information about a business called Pinnacle Professional Development that we might be interested in. I do. Would you be available to come in and make a formal statement? We've received several complaints about this organization, and your information might help us build a comprehensive case. When do you need me? How about this afternoon? 2 o'clock? The police station was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, institutional furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that made everyone feel like they were in trouble even when they weren't. Detective Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who clearly understood financial crimes and had no patience for people who thought they were too clever to get caught. Mr. Merrickson, I want you to know that you're not under investigation here. We're treating you as a victim of fraud, and we appreciate your cooperation in helping us understand how this organization operated. She walked me through the same information I'd presented to the corporate board, but with a focus on the criminal aspects of what Rain and Lane had been doing. Tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, the list of potential charges was extensive. How many other victims are we talking about? I asked. Based on what we've uncovered so far, at least 20 women over the past 3 years. The total amount of money involved is probably close to $500,000, and that's just what we can document. The real number is probably much higher. What happens to my wife? Detective Chen's expression was sympathetic but professional. That depends on how cooperative she is, and whether she's willing to testify against Morin and Harlex. The expense fraud charges are pretty straightforward, but if she helps us build cases against the main perpetrators, the prosecutor might be willing to work with her on a plea agreement. After I finished at the police station, I drove to the Blue Heron for a drink and some time to process everything that had happened. The bar was quieter than it had been the night before, but there was still an undercurrent of excitement as people discussed the previous evening's confrontation. Cleo was working the afternoon shift, and she poured me a whiskey without being asked. Heard you had a busy morning, she said. Corporate board meeting and police interview. Not exactly how I planned to spend my Friday. Any word on what's happening with Rain and Lane? Police are building cases against them. Sounds like they've been running this scam for years, and there are a lot more victims than I realized. Cleo nodded. Guys like that always think they're smarter than everyone else. They get away with it for a while, and then they get sloppy and overconfident. My phone buzzed with a text from Shiloh. Gray, I need to talk to you. The police want me to testify against Rain and Lane. My lawyer says I need to cooperate if I want to avoid prison time. I showed the message to Cleo, who raised an eyebrow. She's finally figuring out how much trouble she's in, Cleo said. Looks like it. I texted back, What do you want from me? The response came immediately. I want to know if you'll support me if I testify. I want to know if there's any chance we can work things out. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. The betrayal, the lies, the financial fraud, the public humiliation, the 24 years of marriage that had led to this moment. Finally, I typed back, The divorce papers will be filed Monday. Your cooperation with the police is between you and your lawyer. We have nothing left to work out. The response took longer this time. I understand. I'm sorry, Gray. For all of it. I turned off my phone and finished my whiskey. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was the kind of evening that might have been beautiful if I'd been in the mood to appreciate it. You okay? Cleo asked. I will be. What's next for you? I thought about it. The apartment, the divorce, the new life I was going to have to build from scratch at 52 years old. I'm thinking about starting my own security consulting firm, specializing in helping people protect themselves from exactly the kind of scam that Rain and Lane were running. Cleo's smile was approving. That sounds like a good way to turn a bad experience into something useful. That's the idea. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office, a small space above a coffee shop downtown, when Detective Chen called with an update. Thought you'd want to know that we arrested Morin and Harlex this morning. Grand jury returned indictments on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. We're looking at serious prison time for both of them. What about the other victims? Most of them are cooperating with the prosecution. Your wife included. She's agreed to testify in exchange for a plea deal on the expense fraud charges, probably looking at probation and restitution rather than prison time. And their business? Completely shut down. We've seized their assets, frozen their accounts, and made sure they can't operate under any other names. They're done. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a while, looking out the window at the street below. People walking by, living their lives, dealing with their own problems and challenges. Most of them probably thought they were too smart to get conned, too careful to fall for the kind of scam that had destroyed my marriage. But I knew better now. I knew that everyone was vulnerable to the right kind of manipulation, that everyone had weaknesses that could be exploited by people who were patient and clever enough to find them. That's why I was in business now, not just to help companies protect their data and systems, but to help individuals protect themselves from the kind of predators who specialized in emotional and financial exploitation. My first client was a woman whose husband had been targeted by a business mentor who was remarkably similar to Rain Morin. My second was a man whose wife had been convinced to invest their retirement savings in a life coaching program that promised to transform their marriage. The work was satisfying in a way that corporate security consulting had never been. I wasn't just protecting abstract systems and data, I was helping real people avoid the kind of devastation that I'd experienced. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter from Shiloh. She was living in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a medical office, trying to rebuild her life after losing everything she'd thought was important. The letter was an apology, mostly, an acknowledgement of what she'd done, an explanation of how she'd gotten caught up in Rain and Lane's manipulation, a recognition that her choices had consequences that extended far beyond her own life. She didn't ask for forgiveness, which was good because I wasn't ready to offer it. She didn't ask for reconciliation, which was even better because that ship had sailed permanently. She just wanted me to know that she understood what had happened and that she was trying to become a better person. I read the letter once and then filed it away. Not because I was holding on to anger or resentment, but because it represented a chapter of my life that was definitively closed. The man who had been married to Shiloh Ravlin for 24 years was gone, replaced by someone who understood that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. The new Gray Merrickson was harder, more cynical, less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But he was also more honest, more self-reliant, and less vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that had destroyed his marriage. A year after everything started, I was having a drink at the Blue Heron when Cleo asked me if I ever regretted how I'd handled the situation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you tried to work things out instead of going for total destruction? She asked. I thought about it. Sometimes. But then I remember that working things out would have required me to accept that my wife had been lying to me for over a year, stealing money to fund an affair, and planning to continue the arrangement indefinitely. It would have required me to pretend that none of that mattered. And you couldn't do that? I couldn't do that. Some things can't be forgiven, and some relationships can't be saved. The trick is knowing the difference. Cleo nodded. Fair enough. And you're happy with how things turned out? I looked around the bar, at the people talking and laughing and living their lives. I thought about my business, my apartment, my new understanding of who I was and what I was capable of. I'm not happy, I said, but I'm free. And sometimes that's more important. The next morning, I got a call from a potential client, a man whose wife had started working with a relationship coach who was charging $5,000 for a weekend intensive program. The story sounded familiar, and I found myself smiling as I scheduled the consultation. Some people never learn. But fortunately for my business, there are always people like me who are willing to help them figure it out the hard way. I hung up the phone and got back to work. There were vulnerabilities to identify, attack vectors to map, and predators to expose. It was exactly the kind of work I was meant to be doing. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a better life from the wreckage of the old one and helping other people do the same.